Well, so to make this service example, we are going to use, in this case, Apache 1, the deployment Apache 1. Remember, if we go inside, the container to which the image is associated is an HTTPD image. That is, it's a normal web server. Since it is a front end, that is, since it is a web service, it should be accessible from outside the cluster. Then we have to create a service of type node port. We are not going to create it of type load balancer because we are in an Openshift that will not offer us any external IP and therefore it will not work correctly. So I'm going to select deployment Apache 1. We are going to do the first thing in command mode. Being in the terminal console, I use OC get deploy Apache 1, which I have working here. So I have here the Apache 1 that at the time of finishing the previous video, I left with 2 replicas. Those of you who have it, well, let's create a service just like in Kubernetes. So OC expose, let's expose this service. We are going to call it, for example, with -- name, Apache 1 SVC. If we do not give it a name, you already know that it will put the name of the service the same as the name of the deployment. But hey, for that matter, it's the same. Once we have done this, I'm going to tell it that I want it on the Apache 1 deploy. That is, I have to enter the type of resource that I'm going to associate with this service, and it's the Apache 1 deploy. And then we are going to specify the type of port that I want to use. And I will use node port. Make sure the capitalization is correct. If you look closely, it tells me that the service is created. So just like in Kubernetes, if we do a get SVC, the service data will come out. You see Apache 1 SVC, which has the node port type associated with it. Here I have the internal IP cluster, and notice that when we are working with node port type services, remember that they will map the internal port of the container, in this case 80, because the container is listening on port 80 because it's an Apache and is mapping it to port 31767 of the cluster. Therefore, in order for me to access this resource within our Openshift, we have to indicate this port, which you remember was a problem, right? Because in the end, you cannot be giving your clients ports like this. Remember that in Kubernetes, we used ingress type resources that clients could use. Although here at Openshift, we continue to use or can continue using ingress type resources, you will see that there is a much more interesting one, which are routes. But for now, we are going to leave that for later chapters, and we are going to see how this service could work to give us access to our web application in Apache. And so I go to my web browser. The first thing would be to copy the port, because it puts a random port number, although in the deploy here, when we did the expose, it could have been given an IP starting at 30,000. But well, we'll leave it like that. Before continuing, we have to ask what IP our Openshift is listening to. Be careful, because depending on where we have it installed and with what virtualizer, the IP can be very different. If I use here CRC IP, note that curiously it tells me that it's listening on 127.0.0.1. It's very possible that you will get a 192, 168, etc. It doesn't matter too much. The important thing is to get the IP in that installation, because I have to access through that IP address. Remember that this is a virtual machine that is running inside your PC. Therefore, the access via network is a little more complicated. If I wanted to do it in a traditional way, then I would have to access this resource here. Remember, the usual thing, especially if you are on Linux or Mac, is that it gives you an address 192. something, but it depends a lot on the virtual seat and other resources. It's not important. The important thing is that it's giving me IP that I should use in the web browser. I will type 127.0.0.1 and then I will paste the port that I copied before. Well, so I have made a mistake. This is not the port. This is the port in my case. If everything goes well, it says it works. This is the text returned by a container of an Apache image that is taken from Docker. Be careful if you have chosen any other image or an Nginx, as this could give you something else. So with this port, visually it's a little ugly. I wanted to use port 80. So we would have to use either an ingress controller, which I am sure you have used in Kubernetes, or a much more elegant and easier solution that is used within Openshift, the roots. But we will see this in a later section when we finish the topic of services. Well then, in summary, I'm going to go back to command mode. Here I have made an OC expose. I have given it the service name, I specified what it has to be exposing, and then the type. I can put node port or I can put cluster IP. For example, if I were creating, as happens in Kubernetes, a MySQL will be of type cluster IP because I will not want other resources to access that node, that MySQL component, that deploy MySQL. I don't want it to be external. On the other hand, this one, which is an Apache, will be perfect. In fact, this Apache will surely be the one that connects to my MySQL, and the front containers are the ones that connect with those in the backend. Well, let's see how this looks on the website. So I will go to the part of the console where the services are located. In the networking part, and they are called, as you see, services. I go into services and I can see that it's called Apache SVC. But